Hello everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Empowering Businesses for Tomorrow, Decoding the Digital Future in Switzerland. My name is Decoding, and I'm the lead analyst for telecoms and technology at the AIU part of the Economist Group. As part of my job, I obviously look a lot at technology in telecoms company, but increasingly I'm researching the adoption of technology within different industries. This webinar is a third of a three-part series on future readiness, and after having focused on both the UK and Germany, we are now looking at Switzerland, which is a different type of market, and this for two reasons. One, it is obviously smaller, but in many ways more advanced, especially in terms of the latest form of connectivity available to both consumers and businesses. And two, it is also home to some of the largest multinationals in the world in some key sectors, such as food, pharmaceutical, and finance. We're also doing this webinar 2 years to the month when COVID started to hit in most markets and we entered lockdown. This started a large-scale experiment when most of us started to work from home, an experiment which we believe we managed to get through. But what lesson can we learn from the pandemic and from disruption in general? I'd like to thank our sponsor, Wipro Limited, for making this discussion possible. And let me introduce now our four panelists. With us, we have René Mulder, who is a country head and managing director in Wipro Limited in Switzerland. We have Pascal Emile, who is Chief Digital Information Officer, Wealth Management at UBS Switzerland. We've got Tomoko Yoko, who is a researcher and advisor at the IMD Business School based in Lausanne. And we have Diana Eggenschwiller, who is the Deputy Managing Director of Digital Switzerland. The discussion will be articulated around three main themes: the businesses of tomorrow, or to harness digital technologies and not to prepare for the future. So let's start the discussion with a couple of quick questions. The first one being very, very quick with a yes or no answer, please, for all our panelists. But has COVID accelerated plan for digital transformation? Let's start with René.
Yes, definitely.
Diana?
Yes, and sometimes no.
Thank you. Pascal?
Yes, absolutely.
And Tomoko?
Yes, it has.
And let me follow up with another fairly quick question. In terms of what has been the single biggest change you've seen in the last 2 years? And maybe let's start with Diana, because she's saying yes and no.
The biggest change, I would say, is the new mentality of people.
Very interesting. René, what has been the biggest change for you in your business in the last couple of years?
So the biggest change is definitely that all is virtual now.
Indeed it is, and I think this webinar is probably a perfect example of that. Pascal, what about you?
I think the biggest change for us has been really around accommodating the new ways of working, the hybrid working model, combined with the acceleration of the delivery of digital roadmaps.
And from your perspective, Tomoko, what has been the biggest change we've seen in the last couple of years?
Well, many companies have launched into digital business transformation, and so that's why you see the statistics that digital transformation is accelerating. However, at the same time, many are actually struggling to implement it successfully.
Yes, and I think that's a very important element. You know, we talk about technology, and sometimes for us in the technology field, we think it's easy, but it's not as easy. Sometimes it does. So I want to go back to you, Diana, because you said yes and no. In what sense you don't think that COVID has acted as an accelerator from your perspective?
Well, generally, yes, it has accelerated a huge amount. But I think it's also important to consider what happens if it accelerates a lot. There's always kind of a balance, right? If something accelerates a lot, there's also a contrary balance. And a lot of people also realize, that they have to calm down from all those social media and so on. It's kind of an overload of digitalization. So I think there's both sides where businesses accelerate, but then also individuals. I see so many people going off social media and trying to turn off their phones. So I think, that's both sides, but generally I would also agree that accelerates.
That's an interesting perspective. Obviously, we're seeing, social media always in the news. Technology is very, very broad, so it's not kind of a one-size-fits-all. Maybe going back to either René or Pascal, in terms of your business, have you also seen that level of pushback in terms of when you're trying to implement new technology, new roles, new things? You're also seeing a pushback from some of your employees or for some people within your organization in terms of having to explain what's happening and why is it important for the business to do so? Maybe let's start with Renee.
So honestly, we haven't seen this, that there was a pushback in using these new technologies and digitalization, as it was more or less the only way to keep the business running, right? So we saw a fast adaptation on it. I get the downside, or let's say the problematic we saw was then all the time, how do you deal with it? So that means when you're always on, you work around the clock, especially at the start of the pandemic. It was call after call, meeting after meeting. So from the transactional part, it was not a challenge to use it, but finding the right rhythm and coming back to work rhythm is also take care of the employees. That was one of the major challenges, but not the adoption of technology.
Pascal, would you agree with that perspective? It's more about new ways of working rather than having to convince people to adopt technology.
Yeah, I agree with that. And actually, funnily enough, we saw some really interesting statistics in our client base in Switzerland, where the take up on the adoption of those digital tools we had that were actually already available significantly increased, as you would expect. But more interesting was I would say the older generation of our clients. They were very, very quick to get online and really adjust to this new way of interaction with the client advisors. So we were expecting, in essence, maybe to have to spend more time with different client segments to get them online, and actually, as much as we had planned for it, it wasn't as hard as we anticipated. So that was a very interesting takeaway for us.
Yeah, I think people have managed to use this technology, or were used to using them far more quickly than I think might have been expected. If you ask people maybe 2 years previously or even a month previously, would you be able to do that? And that kind of gives me kind of a good way to ask for folks. Yeah, absolutely. Carry on.
Just to add, I think that the whole concept of convenience and the ability to consume the services as and when you're ready to, and not have to adjust your schedule to the opening hours of the bank, for example. This was the second trend we saw with availability of services really being consumed outside of the normal business hours for mainstream products. Yes.
Yes, and I absolutely agree with that. I think convenience is very relevant across the board. And that kind of leads me to a follow-up question, maybe for Tomoko, in terms of, for you, obviously, as an academic or working for a business school, what does a future-ready business look like? What kind of characteristic does a business require in order to take advantage of those new technologies?
Right. Well, I think the situation that we're facing, whether it's the pandemic or global circumstances, it's one of high uncertainty. So we come to believe that businesses that need to be future ready have three characteristics. One is that they are nimble, that is the ability to avoid threats. The other is that they are robust, that they have the ability to absorb shocks. And the third one is that they are responsive, that they have this ability and resilience to bounce back. So those are the three characteristics that I would say are important and critical for future businesses.
Yes, and I think in your answer, you kind of strengthening what has been said previously, which is it's about learning new ways of working. It's not about convincing people to use technology, because I think most people are used to using technology, especially in almost developed markets, but ways of what to change, working from home, not being in the office every day, having different types of hours. This is kind of a way, what to deal with clients which are also on the same timeline and usually will go through the same level of transformation. And this is what we're kind of seeing. And that kind of leads me to move on to our kind of a next segment, which is about how to harness those digital technology. So I think we've established that it's about learning how to use them, learning how to make the best advantage of them, learning to make sure that your business can take advantage of them. So a question for all of you in terms of what has been the role of digital technology, and this probably has been one in particular that helped you out the most in terms of navigating disruption, sudden change, especially during the pandemic. And let's start a question with René.
So the role of digitalization was very essential during the pandemic because it helped a lot of businesses to survive, honestly, on the one hand side. On the other side, also, it opened up new opportunities for new businesses. So from that point of view, the pandemic has definitely accelerated or speed up the adoption and the change in this area. So from that point of view, it's an essential part of future businesses to be digital ready and work on the transformation.
And would you maybe have an example in maybe one particular area you can share with us where that acceleration has been very apparent? Is it like something that springs to mind in terms of one specific example, maybe?
So one part was also referring to that what Pascal said earlier, that a lot of the technology or the possibilities, capabilities were already there in Switzerland, but not used. And this started from the beginning, right? We know, especially in the financial sector, with a lot of restrictions, virtual working is not really permitted or is enabled. But in the pandemic, it went up very fast and led to the situation that a lot of people were able to use it more from a digital perspective outside of business hours, and especially, and this is interesting, I agree to that, also the older generation. And if you look at our population in Switzerland in general, we are getting older and older. So from that point of view, gives also hope that technology and new stuff is not just something for younger people.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And maybe moving on, I mean, technology has to be for everyone. And I think training will also be kind of a key element in terms of teaching everybody, not just older, younger employees, but making sure that everyone can take advantage of some new tools that are now available as part of the workplace. And maybe that kind of leads me to a question for Pascal in terms of maybe moving away a bit from the pandemic. We're looking at technology in general, especially as part of your role. But what role do digital technology have in preparing a business for the future, in your opinion?
Look, I think for our organization, we obviously have been very explicit about the role that technology can play. And we always talk about using technology as a key differentiator for the bank and for our clients. And therefore, I think it really is at the forefront of our discussions. Now, you can look at it from different angles, but I think I go back to convenience. I think our mantra is really around developing our technology landscape so that we can deliver services to the clients in a personalized, relevant, it has to be on time, obviously, and it has to allow for seamless client interaction. So we always refer to the bank going pro, if I use the acronym here, to really leverage technologies such as AI, really harness the huge amount of data we have across the organization, but also use that not just to evolve the current offerings and really bring innovation to the clients, but also around being more precise on specific topics, the way we are forecasting and making recommendations for the client portfolios, the way we're using the technology to also protect client data, to protect the employees from making mistakes in a digital world. You all know about the threats out there. And really, ultimately, at the end of the day, I would say protect the bank as well. The trusted relationship between the client and the bank is something that is very high on our agenda from a focus point of view, and making sure that we can continue to operate in a seamless manner over time. The key focus for the last, I would say, couple of years has been around reinforcing the role our digital roadmaps for each business actually play in terms of the investment governance, and I think the vision we have for the future. So when you look at it, it is from my point of view a critical role that digital technology plays in reinventing, the bank of the future, at least for UBS, the UBS of the future.
Yes, I mean, it's pretty clear that any businesses, whether in banking like your one or anybody else, which doesn't use technology in the next few years, is probably not going to survive. And I remember actually doing a survey before the pandemic, and we still had about 10% of people saying technology is not important. I think if we were to do that survey now, those people will be far fewer. Diana, you wanted to intervene there?
Yes, actually, I wanted to add on the role of technology during the pandemic on in the future. So I think we all agree it's an accelerator, but I thought it was really interesting. The role of technology was also kind of a tester, kind of like survival of the fittest. It was kind of a mirror for many companies to see, hey, are you ready for the future? Yes and no. And then that was a very, for some companies, an ugly mirror, or for some good. And I think that was very helpful for companies to say, okay, that's where I stand at the moment. And another thing on role, I think it's also a challenger between the old world and the new world. And that has for me to do with the culture. So we're going from a culture where it was controlled, where you had to be in the office from 9 to 5 or whatever. And that's not anymore the case. Already before there was signs that the millennials, the young people, they don't want to be anymore in this clear rule setting. It's a fluid between, the life and work. And that's something that went upside down. And it went from control to also trust and reaching KPIs rather than how many hours have you been in the office. And and I will also be curious at some point from the people in the panel, so how they handle now the future, especially in big companies.
Yes, Tomoko, you wanted to intervene there as well.
Yes, I think we just completed a 2-year study of how companies across Europe, and there were also within our sample many companies in Switzerland, how they leverage digital technologies through the pandemic. And so here, I think I'd like to just add a little bit of the nuance of how companies actually leverage digital technologies, especially during different stages of a crisis. So what we found was actually at the outset of the crisis, a lot of companies, because of the COVID, at least in the COVID pandemic, because of the restrictions towards physical contacts, of course, a lot of companies decided to use digital technologies primarily for business continuity purposes. And as my other panelists have spoken about, those who were digitally mature before the pandemic were able to use the technologies they had on hand, or rather simple technologies, to be able to virtualize their critical business continuity processes. But what we also found was that then once the initial crisis had peaked in terms of how they respond, that many companies started to use digital technologies in a different way. They started to look into how they can actually scale some of these digital experiments that they had done, in the thick of the crisis, and how they could actually leverage it towards different geographies or different business units. And then once this crisis had somewhat stabilized for them, we found that a lot of companies actually started investing in and started using digital technologies, for more innovation-related activities. So you saw this change in their mindset, and I think it comes back to some of the panelists talking about the future readiness, that the going through the pandemic, at least as they came out of it, although we are still in it, a lot of companies that we talked to had started thinking about and reflecting about how they could now use digital technologies for resilience and how they could move into the future. So that provides a little bit of nuance about how companies adapted their digital technologies at different stages of the pandemic and of different crises.
Yes, I think you're right. I think not everybody is adapting at the same speed, which means that you're going to have early adopters. Some people will focus on cost saving, business continuity. Others will focus on finding new revenue streams within the business. Renee, you wanted to add something on that as well.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that what Tomoko said, right? You can see it like when the pandemic started, we came in the phase where we had to fix the situation that people were able to work somehow, right? Some businesses were better prepared, other ones had to start with. Then we came in the phase where we stabilized the situation. So the limitation in this point of time was more or less bandwidth. Where do we get bandwidth? Because technology was there, but bandwidth was the limit. And then I totally agree to that. Now we see the trend, really the transformation. So companies looking, how can I use this experience I made in the last 2 years, more or less now, to really innovate my business and definitely get better resilience. So I totally agree to that, what Tomoko said, and that's what we're seeing. In addition to that, what also came up is the whole security aspect, right? So cyber security, the attacks around that was one of the main topics which kept us busy in the last years with our customers as well. But all overall, we can really say it's kind of fix it, stabilize, and now we're really in the transformation from my point of view.
Diana.
Well, I think it's really great. We're talking about technologies, but I think one thing that is underestimated, I think, is this whole change of how we plan in the future, right? It's one, we're coming from years of having 10-year plans. This went down to 5-year plans, and then 2-year plans, and now I think there's a totally change. You're not trying to predict the future, you're thinking in different scenarios, and that's the trend that also April Ryan is like a futurist who says also, you look into your company, what things are working well, which teams are performing, which ones are adapting. And also adapting and change comes into two kind of different ways. Either it's enforced, where people don't react so well, or you bring the people on board and make them empowered, and involve them in decisions, so they really want to work with those changes. And I think this human aspect, it's so critical, because the company is only as good as the people are, and technology is also a part. And I give you an example. Digital Switzerland, basically, we are fostering the whole innovation in Switzerland, and one part is to involve the public and sensibilize them on the digital transformation and mindset. So we're creating one of the biggest movement and events across Switzerland, and now in 8 countries. Now, 2 years ago, we take 1 year to prepare for that. So 5 months before Digital Day, COVID hit. And some of the management said, oh, let's just quit and not going to do it. Let's break it. But then the team was so determined and saying, no, we have to do something for the public during this time. So the decision came from the team. And so that motivated them so much. So they worked hard. They had high motivation. It was a totally work overload, but we all stick together. And so the whole team culture is a huge part of the digital transformation. You have to make sure you have those talents on board, the people who are flexible and can be adapted very quickly on situations. And that's why the culture is important. Imagine you have more people who are, ego driven, career driven, and then make decisions according to their career, but not for the company. They keep information to have the power of information. And that's just the life quality of many people will suffer under these circumstances. And that's why I think it's so important that we listen to the team, involve them in decision. And it sounds really cheesy, but it's really important one for me. It's like to create trust in a team. And if I talk to some other generation, when I say I invited my team to my home to kind of show that I trust them, that it's my personal home, and we ate pizza here, and everybody came with a song and shared it and also expressed what it means to them. A lot of other generations say, oh my God, that's this feely, touchy thing. Oh my God, just stay away from that. But I think it's so important these days to create this trust, and that's that's one way to do it. And I think it's something that is absolutely underestimated next to what technology to use. So that's something really deep in my heart for the team development.
Yeah. Pascal, you wanted to move on? I just wanted to say that the human element is going to be always very important. I think it's worth saying again that technology doesn't necessarily mean that in 10 years' time, none of us will have jobs. You will just have different types of jobs and do different tasks, but the human will still be there. Pascal.
No, absolutely, Dexter. So that makes sense. I think what Diana mentioned resonates particularly with me. I think given the some of the activities we started here in the bank. So the concept of looking at the experimentation we've done on technology before and taking this in brackets to mainstream is a journey we're on currently. Just to give two examples, using augmented reality during a meeting between a client advisor and a client to bring additional graphs and products on the fly and using the digital interaction you're having with a client. Or frankly, I think we're looking at creating a completely virtual branch that with VR, virtual reality, you can actually really create very, very realistic and quite exciting events without having to move clients from to a single event place, which sometimes could be difficult nowadays. But beside that, the whole operating model change that actually was derived from, I would say, a continuation of the strategy the bank had before. We embarked ourselves on a very important agile transformation where we bring in together the business colleagues and the technology colleagues that are delivering solutions for the clients, and doing this in ways to create a unified operating model across the bank that actually empowers the teams that are able to deliver, working on delivering the solutions. But all of this is linked to the key outcomes the bank has defined as part of strategy. So it's about really empowering those multidisciplinary teams to drive, the delivery activity, leveraging the expertise, and in a way that also is changing the role of leadership as part of that whole digital technology discussion, because we have to almost focus on removing the impediments as opposed to completely directing the teams in terms of what they need to do on a day-to-day basis. So that is a very exciting transformation that we're going through right now, and the feedback from Tomoko and Diana really, really resonates in terms of what we see as well.
Yes, I mean, technology would obviously bring changes, and I think just to kind of quickly end up that part of the discussion we've had on us in digital technology, technology is there. That doesn't mean the human won't be there. It brings some opportunities. I think most people are definitely understanding the need for adaptation and transformation, but there's different levels in terms of businesses, in terms of what stage they're in, what technology they're using, what they're using it for, whether it's business continuity, whether it's cost saving, whether it's kind of entering a new market. We're obviously seeing competition coming from new players who are trying to be more nimble, maybe as a traditional incumbent, by doing things all online, and then you realize maybe they're not as good as the traditional players. There's also a lot in terms of making sure you get your people on board and you train them right, especially in the long term, because these things are moving very, very quickly. I mean, I started in 2007 as an analyst, when people were still wondering, whether Apple was going to be a good player in the smartphone business. And I think, we figured that out, that in the last 15 years, it's actually a leading player in the smartphone business. So things are moving very, very quickly. And I think that kind of gets to the point that Diana raised in terms of planning to the future. Can you do 10-year plan to the future, or the technology is going to be changing so much by 2030 that doing a 10-year plan is probably not useless, but it's not going to be as good as maybe it was 10 years ago when you had a greater clarity. And that kind of leads me on to our final part, which is looking at preparing for the future. And I'm going to have a question for all of you to start with in terms of, to what extent can companies prepare for the future? What can they do to make sure that they take advantage of technologies and make sure that the employees can have access to those new technology, can know to use those new technology and know what to do with it, and to make sure that it actually benefits their business when they're introducing new technology? Let's start our question with René.
Okay, thanks for the question. So preparing for the future, there's several elements. First of all, I would really look on what kind of infrastructure do I need for the future from a technology perspective. And here having enough flexibility, right? So we are talking about a lot of cloud topics, etc. That's more or less daily business. So having here the possibility, depending on the development, that you can scale up or scale down. That's one thing I would look on it, as we saw also when the pandemic started, that especially the infrastructure, bandwidth, and all these topics were a limitation. So we prepared for this, thinking in options. The second part is having the right talents and people with you. So spend a lot of energy in developing the skills, the future readiness skills for digital topics. And also here have a good variety, not counting on the own people. Start to build up ecosystems, that you have the right partners that you're working with, so that you can also pull in on short notice the skill sets you need. As I think there's no one who can do everything by themselves, right? We're a distributed society and we need strong ecosystems, which also sometimes means that you work closely with a competitor to serve a customer, to find a solution. But this is what we really need to take care of. And last but not least, what for me is important, that have the right purpose, right? So giving the vision for the people, why are they doing it, working on the sustainability, the greater topics, because that's where people then running for, especially when you come again into a crisis. And on the other side, doing the extra mile when they're also already in an environment which you can say, oh, we can be satisfied, right? So that's the 3 areas where I would look onto.
Yes. Pascal, would you add anything to those elements that René has added, as mentioned?
Yeah, I think a couple of points for me, Dexter. So the first one is, it sounds obvious, but for companies to prepare for the future, they have to be willing to take responsibility for it, and they have to engage. René mentioned sometimes with external partners and even maybe the competition. So if you're not willing to engage in creating that future, obviously, you become a passive player. And that is never a very good thing. The second piece for me is really around ensuring that we can work with the talent and the employees of the organization to look at innovating at the edge maybe, and be willing to disrupt existing business model and service offering. That can create some internal conflicts in terms of how fast we can get on that journey. But with an open mindset and a willingness to change, those discussions can take place in a very constructive manner. We very often face the challenge of unlearning the way we've been doing things in the past as you go through those discussions. Like with any large organization, we tend to try to optimize and become more efficient at what we do, which can create an additional hurdle when you look at innovating and reinventing yourself. for the future. And the last piece, René mentioned it as well, is the importance of taking into account the importance of anticipating future major trends, looking at 15, 20 years ahead. We mentioned sustainability. This has been a topic for us for many, many years in the past. The upcoming trends we see are related to the importance of data, the virtual world. As such, you've all looked at maybe different ideas with the meta world, etc., etc. But at the end of the day, all of this has to be done using the sustainability agenda in mind, because that is what will give the bank a strong foothold from a stability point of view, but also in terms of being able to respond to a lot of the feedback and we get through the interactions with the clients across all generations, by the way, not just the a specific client segment, etc. So, the combination of those things, I believe, if all companies are able to embrace those three aspects, can really help them define, reinvent themselves and define the purpose for the future.
Absolutely. And maybe taking a kind of a non-specific company or specific industry perspective from either Diana or Tomoko in terms of what can business do, and maybe kind of moving on as well in terms of what are the limitations and what has been holding some businesses back in terms of adopting new technology. Tomoko, if you want to start with that question.
Well, I don't know if there's anything holding back businesses from adopting new technology. I think if they, digital is becoming the backbone of how businesses operate. The question very much is, of course, is in addition to the usual business strategy type of conversations about cost and revenue, I think what businesses will have to really think about, not only as they adopt and accelerate, but as they go into the future, is how now if technology and digital technologies are going to be the backbone of how companies operate, the question is really going to become how can businesses do digital responsibly. So I think we've also heard from Pascal and from René about responsibility and purpose, but the question is about ethics and making sure that using digital responsibility in a responsible way is not only about cybersecurity and about personal data. It's very fragmented. These types of responsibilities are fragmented in businesses right now, but I think it really is about making all of these potential impacts of technology aware, being visible and making it aware to every individual in the organization is going to be one of the biggest challenges for businesses going forward as they try and harness digital technologies.
Diana, what's your perspective on that?
Well, I think something that might stop us, and especially in Switzerland, is the mindset. If you look at, there's one survey, the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, that shows out of 50 countries, Switzerland ranks 49th in people fearing to fail. And now coming back to what Pascal said, right? Yes, I think it's amazing if we want to think open, try out a new thing, be disruptive. But that also means we have to learn how to fail. And I don't know, you guys have to tell me, the big companies, I mean, you have quarterly goals, shareholders and so on who are looking at the numbers. So how much space is there to really fail? And I see that especially across Switzerland, that failing is still seen as, something bad. While in the States, for example, if you fail, they say, oh, great, well, I'm sure you learned something, you're going to do a new big thing. And then they're much more fostering that. So I think this is one part how we can get stuck. And the second one is, in my opinion, is the topic of talent. I think René and Pascal also mentioned that by 2028, it's estimated that we have 35,000 people, a lack of ICT experts in Switzerland only. And Europe, don't have those talents. So we really have to focus on how do we create our own talent. So every company has its responsibility to build on the skills, like René said. And also something that Switzerland has to think about is like all those women. There's more than 50% women who go to university, but then if you look at who is working 100% after university, is more than 50% are men. So the whole setup has to also change, set up on equal salary, but then also the arrangement if you have family, because that's such an easy way to have our own talents and foster them. I think it will be not enough, meaning that we need to also foster some international talents to Switzerland. But yes, I think those two factors will maybe limit us in some ways.
Yes, and now ask this question to both Pascal and Renee. So one, how do you reconcile the short-term goals or requirement with kind of the long-term ambition in terms of rolling out technology? And number two, how do you ensure that enough talent will start joining your company, especially as there's going to be a lot of competition? Pascal, start with you.
Yeah, it's very insightful comments from Diana, and I would feel we are actually following the same thought processes here. Very glad to see that. Part of the agile transformation we are driving is really to also create a safe environment for the different teams to experiment and fail, but fail fast. And if you do it in that way and you learn from those failures, this actually gives you experience and actually allows you to change course to allow the teams to hit the objectives that were set, so that the impact on shareholder price, etc., if any, should be a positive one and not a negative one. But of course, it requires a cultural evolution within the organization as well, to allow those experimentations to take place in a safe manner. And we developed a framework to allow us to do that. The second piece is very topical, is around the availability of talent. And we believe that if we create the best working environment with the agile operating model, with a very good tooling for the developers, we will also change the perception of the organization and marketplace, and that should allow us to attract more talent. So we continue to nurture very much the relationship we have with the educational companies in Switzerland, the universities, etc., to bring apprenticeship, but also help them to understand what the jobs of tomorrow could look like, and really guide the students in terms of where they should maybe orient themselves to actually try to bridge the gap, or the anticipated gap in the future. But obviously, like every large global organization, we have access to talent pool elsewhere. And again, I go back to the operating model. We looked at aligning, I would say, some of the delivery activities and the product owners and the product teams to maybe some of the markets where we have critical mass. And that allows us to create a rebalancing across the organization from a talent sourcing point of view. But I think it really is all around having what I call timely answers for very volatile markets, as we see today, to be able to continue attracting the right talent, whether it's around work conditions, around the onboarding process, and I guess around also benefits as much as possible. We believe very strongly that if you create an exciting workplace with very, very motivating product and services deliveries from a roadmap point of view, again, hence the importance of digital roadmaps here, that should allow you to have the best value proposition for attracting the talents of tomorrow.
Rene, what is your perspective on those 2 points, both on the short term versus long term, and also in terms of attracting and retaining talent going forward?
Okay, so on the short term, I guess we discussed already a lot in the last 40 minutes. Also, what we did during the pandemic. So further using the technology, investing in technology to enable the business to make it safe. But one very important point is really the people side, right? Talking the whole time about technology. This led definitely to the situation that we have a sky high demand on skilled people. So just to give you an example, in the last 12 months, we increased our workforce worldwide more than 30%, also in Switzerland. So attracting so many people in the short term is an act. Second, is that the demand itself from the businesses in digital technology and solution and services increased by 5 times. So you see, it really went sky high. So, and this is a demand we need to fulfill on the short term, but also seeing how this will develop over the long term. And having this in mind, it's very important to invest in the right technology and in people, building up the right ecosystem, to partner at the right time with the right parties to serve the customers. And last but not least, investing in education. And I know Diana and Digital Switzerland is also pushing this a lot for Switzerland. And it's important, as we see here, a lack of resources on the market. But this is not just a thing which is a local part, just Switzerland. This is something we have globally around the world. And we need also to open up our mind to be flexible. Where do we get which talents from, and how do we collaborate? Because in certain areas, it's just a part of mathematics. We're a small country with 8.5 million people. We will never be able to serve the demand our customers in Switzerland have, especially the multinationals we discussed. And finding here the right mix in education and collaboration, bringing global teams together, giving them the chance to learn locally and also act globally. This is one part which I really would like to encourage, and not seeing it as a fear that work is going to somewhere else or other people coming and taking the work. That is definitely not the fear we should see. The risk is if you're not able to bring people together to fulfill the demand which is there in the market overall, we will lose at the end, right? And will not be competitive. So that's one point I see.
Diana, you wanted to intervene on that point.
Yes, I mean, I totally agree with René and Pascal. And one aspect that I want to bring in that we have not talked about is also that has a connection with talent is the whole startup scene. And it does have also to do with the mentality. So in the startups that we have in Switzerland, 1/5 of investment is coming from Switzerland and the rest is coming from abroad. And this is also something that I believe the government can step in. And there's a professor in Harvard of economics that looked at the effects of governmental investment in the private sector. And he found out that if the government invests in startups and private sector, that the country gets more innovative, and also other private companies will then invest more in startups. So it gives kind of a security of, yes, our government is standing behind it, so it makes sense to also invest. So I think this is something that we definitely have to push, because a lot of startups that I know, they go to Dubai, they have low taxes there, they have the talents there, but I think there's an opportunity to really keep them here. And some of them, they stay in Switzerland, by the way, also because of the location of Switzerland in Europe. Lifestyle is it's an important one that I heard many times. But yeah, also EPFL and IMD, ETH and so on, being a major player. So just also to show that, we're not that much investing in startups versus the international ones. But it's improving. It's improving every year. That's also to be said.
And Tomoko, I saw you also wanting to intervene on that point.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked a lot about, talent development, making sure we have the right talent, which goes into government investment, into Switzerland and education. And I think the question, especially when it regards to digital technologies, is that the digital technologies are innovating faster than we can actually educate and skill. So the other question, of course, is that, the traditional, even if we change the curriculum at universities or change, other types of curriculums, it will not be fast enough. And so I think in that respect, the question that becomes to companies, but also to new entities is, how can we get people certified at a more rapid pace if they have to use a lot of these digital technologies, and it comes into digital marketing as well. So we're starting to see not only traditional educators, but we're also starting to see, for example, these tech platform providers providing certification, because that's what is needed out there in the marketplace as well.
Pascal, it seems that your company is doing something in that area. So if you want to maybe tell us.
Absolutely. Look. I think as mentioned, I think of course we can work with the external providers, and we do so obviously. But we also actually beefed up and increased the focus of our internal education team, right? So UBS University, as part again of the agile transformation, the point that Tomoko really made a very, very important. The pace of innovation learning is accelerating, and therefore we felt we needed to have this internal capability to take the existing employees, which by the way are very important for our success and our continued success, take them onto new journeys and new education journeys, and allowing them to actually acquire new certification as part of their career development. So we came up with dedicated journeys for each of the professions, in line with the evolution of the agile operating model across bank. But not only that, UBS University covers a wide range of topics, whether they are technology, products, or other relevant topics for the employees' personal development. That is a very important part of our setup as well.
Yes. And I think just to quickly end that section, I think obviously technology is quite big and it's quite an important issue, but in order to make sure you roll it out properly, there's two kind of broader things that technology needs to be done. One is education and training and making sure that those people can do their jobs. And that's going to be even more important going forward, especially with, I guess, global competition. And the other is the culture of the company. Or do you make sure and learning how to fail? And maybe that's a EU versus or Europe versus US battle, whether in the US they know how to fail and they try again until they get it right, whereas in Europe, when you fail once, there's maybe a bit of stigma going on there. So preparing for the future is not just, it is important to have the right infrastructure, to have the right products, to have the right services, to make sure you cater to your clients, but culture and education are going to be kind of two key things that every business, whether big or small, will need to do. Let's finish off with some audience questions. And we've got quite a few actually, and some on some key topics. And I'm going to start with probably the main one, something we've discussed a bit, but haven't talked about too much, which is cybersecurity. So maybe a couple of questions on that in terms of, is it the biggest risk for your business? And what do you do to make sure you're as secure or maybe as resilient as you can? Let's start with René on that question.
Yeah, security is very important. And if you don't have a good security environment, you have a risk, definitely. We could see, due to using all these technologies in the last 2 years, that a lot of cybercrime accelerated. So that's on the top agenda of all C-level colleagues, which I know from different businesses. And important is here that you're prepared, have the right governance, how to deal with it. Having the right technology and services around this, plus also do a lot of awareness with your employees, because at the end, the major risk, honestly said, is still the own people not knowing how to use it and open doors for hackers and co. So from that point of view, these are things you always have to bring back to the mind of your employees and also the customers to serve a secure environment. But when I look into development and using also, and I guess Tomoko mentioned it, the hyperscaler solutions, the cloud solutions, here is already a lot of security embedded, right? Taking care of a huge variety, which you maybe not be able to do by yourself, especially when you're a smaller company. But having a clear focus on that and have the awareness that this is a continuous threat you need to deal with is an important point. And yes, the invest in this area has increased, but also the attacks increased heavily in the last 24 months.
Pascal, do you also see the human as one of the main vulnerability in terms of cybersecurity within your organization?
Yeah, I think as René mentioned, we are seeing, for the last few years, increasing activity in that space, and we had to adjust our responses to this threat. It's one of the risks we are looking after. We're keeping a close eye on for sure. It's as René mentioned. I think you have to combine the education, the proactive management activities, but you also have to make sure you have a what I would call an effective crisis management process in place. Moving to the cloud definitely brings some benefits, and even for not just for smaller organizations, by the way, René, also for larger ones, for sure. Maybe the aspect that we have spent a bit more time on recently is around also the dialogue with the regulators, to make sure they really understand the space and they understand our plans, because that's been a regulated business. That also is very important. We constantly adjust our defensive measures and our preventive measures. I wouldn't go into too much details as you would anticipate. Neither would I maybe necessarily say it's the biggest risk. It's an important risk. It's one that has been growing in terms of potential impact, but we obviously have to deal with other risks as well.
Yes, I mean, security probably the main short-term risk, but there's going to be others. I'd like to thank you everyone for this very, very useful and interesting conversation. I think the main takeaways we can take from the discussion is that we've already done quite a lot. There's still a lot to do, and technology is going to keep moving forward. And what is the most advanced technology now is going to look probably very, very old in 5 years' time now, because it's moving very, very, very quickly, and it goes beyond technology. So it's important to have the basics in place, but also you need your education, you need the structure, you need kind of the company environment to make sure that you can take advantage of that technologies going forward. And in the case of Switzerland, obviously being a smaller market in a very, very global world, or to take advantage of those different things. There's some advantages of being small, but there's also potentially some drawbacks as well. I'd like to thank all of our speakers from joining us today. So René Mulder, Diana Engenschwiller, Pascal Emir, and Tomoko Yokoi. I'd like to thank our audience for tuning in, and I'd like to thank our sponsors, Wipro Limited. And I would also like to remind you another time that this is the third of a 3-part webinar series that we've done, and you can obviously watch all of our webinars on the series on future readiness on our website, which is events.economist.com. Thank you very much.